Not all conflict means your relationship is falling apart, but there are some patterns that signal deeper attention is needed before it's too late. In over 20 years of working with couples, I've watched the same 5 patterns show up over and over again in relationships, and they really do point to the couple is headed towards a crisis. And it's not even really about how often you fight, it's more about what happens when you do. So let me share with you a few examples so maybe one or another might feel like, yeah, that's what we're dealing with. Do you ever have conversations that never seem to resolve the issue? You might bring something up with your partner and they respond, but somehow you never actually address what you feel the issue is. The conversation kind of circles and maybe deflects the heart of the matter. You end up talking about how you're talking. Don't talk to me like that. Don't use that tone instead of getting to the heart of the matter. And so this pattern isn't really about bad communication skills. It actually points to avoidance. If those same issues pile up and eventually you stop trying to bring things up at all, this is really where emotional distance begins to grow. Sometimes when I'm working with couples and I ask each partner to describe their relationship, often I'm left wondering if they're even talking about the same relationship. It's like they're describing two completely different realities, because in many ways, they are. When conflicts go unresolved and resentments pile up, each partner begins constructing their own version of the relationship in their mind. They're not even living in a shared reality, but kind of like parallel lives that then barely overlap. One person remembers all the times they reached out and felt rejected. The other recalls moments they tried to connect and were met with silence. Both are convinced their version is true, and in a way, both are true for the individual because each partner filters their relationship through their own family imprint, interpreting their partner's actions in ways that match what they learned love looks like growing up. One partner might hear a suggestion and experiences it as a criticism because that's how their parents spoke to them. The other genuinely thought they were being helpful or pointing out something that would be supportive because that's how care was shown in their family. It just goes on. One partner is working late and they think they're being helpful and being a great provider. The other partner sees it as feeling abandoned, replaying childhood evenings, waiting for the parent who just never came home. And so you can see how we're living life, but we're kind of crossing over with how we're perceiving what's going on. And we don't end up responding to who our partner actually is, but more to the ghost of the past we haven't made peace with yet, making us feel like strangers to the person who's lying right beside us. The other pattern I see a lot is that one half of the relationship who's the one doing the emotional heavy lifting, the one noticing when something's off, the one initiating the difficult conversation, the one who reaches out to repair after a fight, the one carrying all the emotional weight of the relationship. Your partner might not even notice something is off. They've become so used to you bringing things up. So they respond when pressed, but they certainly don't initiate. And over time, that person becomes like the manager of the relationship. Eventually, it feels completely exhausting and lonely. The pattern is often learned in how each of you handled emotions growing up. But if it doesn't shift, it definitely tends to erode the foundation of the relationship. I think what makes this one particularly painful is if there becomes like an invisible scorecard that you start keeping. You notice every time that you are the one to say, "Hey, are we okay?" And you start to wonder if you stopped leaning in, if you stopped asking, would they even notice something was wrong? Would the relationship just quietly fade? And here's what often gets missed. The person not doing the emotional labor isn't necessarily uncaring. They may have learned that emotions are dangerous, that bringing things up tends to make it worse, or that if they stay quiet, problems kind of resolve themselves. Maybe they feel inadequate at these conversations, so they just tend to avoid them, not because they don't love you or genuinely want that connection. Or maybe they genuinely don't sense the undercurrents in the same way that you do because they were never taught to attune to emotional shifts and simply really truly don't notice when things are off in the same way that you do. Another common pattern is that repair doesn't end up happening. So maybe the fight happens, it ends badly, and then you both just move on without actually addressing what happened. Both just sort of wait until things feel normal again. Maybe one of you apologizes vaguely and the other kind of accepts it without really talking through how you were hurt or what went wrong or how to avoid it in the future. The problem with skipping repair is that every unresolved conflict leaves like a residue. That residue accumulates, and over time, it becomes resentment. Healthy relationships don't avoid conflict, they repair well after it happens. If you can't repair, the relationship can't really grow. It might sound funny, but learning how to argue well and really what repair is and how it can look inside of your relationship can truly transform everything. Another pattern I observe is not really being able to talk about the hard things without it escalating. Many couples have these topics that are just off limits, not because you decided them together, but because every time you try, it just turns into a fight. So we've got these hot buttons like money and parenting and in laws and intimacy. But when you can't talk about the hard things, these things don't go away, they go underground. And then underground issues eventually show up as distance, resentment, and oftentimes an explosion at the very worst time possible. This pattern means there are unresolved family imprints that keep getting triggered. One or both of you learn that certain conversations are dangerous and best avoided. Until you understand what's actually getting activated, unpacking why it's such an issue, you'll keep hitting that same wall. You might think the problem is that your partner won't communicate or you guys have different backgrounds with money, but really, you're both trapped in a pattern that keeps you disconnected. This work isn't just about learning better communication skills. It's about understanding why vulnerability feels so threatening in the first place. Most often, this points to an unresolved family imprint getting triggered. One or both of you learn that certain conversations feel dangerous. Until you understand what is actually getting activated and unpacking why it's such an issue, you'll keep hitting that same wall. You might think the problem is that your partner won't communicate, or you both have different backgrounds with money, but really, you're both trapped in a pattern that keeps you disconnected. This work isn't just about learning better communication skills. It's about understanding why vulnerability feels so threatening in the first place and creating enough safety so that you can approach these challenging conversations with care and understanding. Another pattern that can be so detrimental to really keeping love thriving is that one of you or both of you keeps score. You remember every time they disappointed you, every time they let you down, every time they didn't show up the way you needed. And then during fights, you bring up these old grievances. Not because you're trying to be hurtful, but because those moments still sting. They never got resolved, so it's like they're still alive inside of your body. Scorekeeping tends to happen when repair didn't happen. It's like an emotional accounting system that kicks in when disappointment and hurt hasn't been acknowledged, when there hasn't been an understanding what the issues are really about. So these patterns aren't about being doomed as a couple. They're more like signals that something underneath needs attention. And the good news is, once you recognize these patterns and you're willing to look underneath the surface issues and kind of ask yourself, what is really driving this dynamic? So much can change. So if you recognize one or maybe two of these patterns in your relationship, what are you supposed to do? The first step that I share with my clients is to acknowledge it. Now, not in the middle of a fight, but to share these things when it's calm, to say what you notice using simple language. Here's the pattern I see. This is what's happening. And it just tends to keep happening. I want to understand why so we can stop this. The next thing we want to do is get curious about what's underneath it. These patterns are not random. They come from somewhere. What did each of you learn about conflict or emotional needs or how you express yourself? The other thing that's super important is to have both of you commit to repair, not just after big fights, but after small moments of disconnection. Repair is that skill that keeps that love alive. If you can do those things together, you can seriously make a dent in this cycle. You don't have to fix everything in this moment, but you can start seeing the patterns more clearly. Really taking a look at how these things are going inside of your relationship can create a significant change. You don't have to fix everything in this moment, but you can start seeing the patterns more clearly. And if you want to decode specific patterns showing up in your relationship, you might want to join my Sunday Relationship Tips newsletter. Every week, I share one clear perspective on the patterns that keep love feeling hard. The link to join us will be in the description below. This channel is all about helping you see the invisible patterns keeping you stuck so you can decide from a place of clarity and not confusion. Subscribe so that we can stay connected.